They had just captured the city after 8 brutal months of siege. 48 hours later, they were trapped inside a death sentence. The Crusader army hadn't even finished celebrating when a massive force appeared on the horizon, outnumbering them 3 or 4 to 1. 20,000 starving, exhausted soldiers who had fought for 8 months were now facing 40 to 75,000 fresh, well-equipped troops. The gates slammed shut. The besiegers became the besieged. This remains one of the most dramatic reversals in military history ever recorded. How did they escape from what seemed like certain death? The answer involves betrayal, a miracle, and the terrifying power of blind faith. But to understand this insane story, we need to go back 1 year earlier, when everything started with a single call from the Pope. In 1095, Pope Urban II called upon the Knights of Europe to march east and reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim control. Tens of thousands answered the call, including nobles, knights, peasants, even women and children, all joining this armed pilgrimage to Jerusalem. They travelled thousands of miles, crossed treacherous mountains, defeated Turkish armies, and now only one final obstacle stood in their way. The city of Antioch, the gateway to Jerusalem, the most formidable fortress on the entire route they needed to take to complete their sacred mission. But Antioch was unlike anything they had ever faced. This was a stone monster, with walls stretching 4 miles and 400 towers watching over. So why was a European army in the Middle East, and how did they end up in this impossible situation of winning and losing at the same time? Antioch sits in what is now southern Turkey, near the Syrian border, a strategically crucial position on the map of the medieval world. Whoever controlled Antioch controlled the road from Europe to Jerusalem. Without it, the Crusaders could never reach the Holy Land they sought. But Antioch also held deep religious significance. This was where St. Peter founded the first Christian church, one of the holiest cities in Christendom. The city once belonged to the Byzantine Empire, but in 1085 the Seljuk Turks captured it through an act of internal betrayal. The man ruling Antioch now was Yagisiyan, a cunning Turkish governor who had served under the great Sultan Malik Shah I himself. When he heard the Crusader army was approaching, Yagisiyan immediately prepared. He stockpiled food, reinforced defences, and called for reinforcements. And he did something ruthless but militarily logical. He expelled the Greek and Armenian Christians from the city to prevent any potential spies inside. Antioch's walls were Byzantine engineering at its finest, nearly 4 miles long, with 400 towers built on extremely difficult terrain. To the south rose Mount Silpius with a citadel perched on top. To the north flowed the Orontes River. A direct assault was nearly impossible. Yagisiyan's garrison numbered around 4,000 to 6,000 men. Not large, but more than enough to hold such a formidable fortress for a very long time. On the Crusader side, there was no single commander, just a loose coalition of European lords, each with their own ambitions and agendas to pursue. Bohemond of Taranto was the most notable. A towering Norman knight, son of Robert Guiscard, the man who had nearly conquered Byzantium itself. Bohemond made no secret of his ambition. He wanted his own kingdom in the east, and Antioch was exactly the target he had set his sights on. Raymond of Toulouse was different. He wanted to honour his oath to the Byzantine emperor, returning conquered lands to Alexios I as promised. Godfrey of Bouillon was the most devout. He truly believed in the sacred mission and had sold everything he owned to join this expedition east. And this was the city they had to capture, a fortress that seemed nearly impossible to breach, with 400 towers silhouetted against the sky. The Crusader army numbered around 30,000 to 40,000 people, including cavalry, infantry, and a large crowd of civilian pilgrims seeking salvation. They had already won victories at Nicaea and Dorylaeum, but Antioch was a completely different challenge, far more difficult than anything before it. Earlier, Baldwin of Boulogne had split off and captured Edessa, creating a buffer zone to the east that protected the main army's flank at Antioch. But internal conflicts were already simmering. Both Raymond and Bohemond wanted Antioch for themselves, and this rivalry would drag on for many months. On October 20th, 1097, the Crusader army finally arrived and began deploying their siege around Antioch's massive walls and towers. They captured the iron bridge over the Orontes River, cutting off one of the city's most important supply routes, a promising start to the siege. Bohemond positioned his forces at the northeastern gate, Raymond to the west, Godfrey in between. But they faced one insurmountable problem from the start. Their numbers were simply not enough to completely surround a city as large as Antioch. The city could still receive supplies from unblocked directions. They had no idea that 8 months of hell awaited them ahead. 8 months that many of them would never live to see the end of. In the first month, the Crusaders tried direct assaults multiple times, but failed every attempt. The walls were too high, too strong, impossible to breach. Yagisian didn't just defend passively. He constantly launched surprise raids, attacking the Crusader camps, causing casualties and spreading terror. In late December, a relief force from Damascus, led by Dukak, marched to break the siege, but the Crusaders intercepted and defeated them before they arrived. An important victory, but it didn't solve the core problem. Antioch still stood defiant, and winter was coming with its bone-cutting cold. Food began to run out. The Crusaders had eaten everything in the surrounding area, and prices skyrocketed so only wealthy nobles could afford to eat. 1 in 7 Crusaders died from starvation and disease during that winter. 1 in 7. Thousands fell without ever fighting a single battle. They started eating their warhorses, the most valuable possession any knight owned. A knight without his horse was a knight with half his power gone. From thousands of horses at the start, only around 700 survived the winter. 700. The once proud cavalry was nearly completely destroyed. Some accounts claim that members of the Tafur group even ate Turkish prisoners to survive, though this detail remains disputed among historians today. Many began deserting. Even Peter the Hermit, who had rallied thousands of peasants to join, fled in the night because he could not take it anymore. Tancred, Bohemond's nephew, was sent to chase him down and bring him back. Peter was publicly humiliated, a stain he would carry for the rest of his life. In February, Tatikios, the Byzantine general sent to accompany the Crusaders, suddenly left without explanation. He vanished into the night like a ghost. Bohemond immediately accused Tatikios of betrayal, using it as justification to declare the Crusaders no longer obligated to return Antioch to Byzantium. On February 9th, another relief force from Aleppo led by Ridwan was also defeated. Twice now, reinforcements had failed to reach the besieged city. Spring arrived and things improved slightly. Warmer weather, more food from surrounding areas, but Antioch still stood like an iron wall before them. And just when things seemed to be getting better, the worst possible news arrived from the east, from the distant city of Mosul far away. Kerbogha, the military governor of Mosul, was assembling a massive army to march on Antioch. Not a few thousand like before, but an entire horde. Estimates of Kerbogha's forces ranged from 60 to 90,000 men, a coalition of multiple Muslim emirs joining forces against the common enemy. Dukak of Damascus, Ridwan of Aleppo, forces from Persia, from Mesopotamia, all contributing troops. This was the largest relief army ever assembled. But fortunately, Kerbogha made a critical strategic mistake. He stopped to besiege Edessa for 3 weeks and failed completely to take it. Those 3 precious weeks gave the Crusaders time to act. Bohemond knew they had to take Antioch before Kerbogha arrived, no matter what it cost. And in that desperate moment, an unexpected opportunity appeared from inside the very walls of Antioch, where no one thought an ally could be found. Firuz was an Armenian guard, possibly a convert to Islam, who controlled the Tower of the Two Sisters on the northwestern section of the walls. Firuz's motives remain a mystery to this day. Some say money, some say personal hatred for Yagisian, some say religious conviction drove him. Whatever the reason, Firuz secretly contacted Bohemond and proposed a simple but deadly deal. He would open the gate in exchange for money and title. Bohemond went to the other leaders with a bold proposal. He had a way into the city, but the condition was that Antioch would belong to him afterward. Raymond of Toulouse was furious. He reminded everyone of their oath to the Byzantine emperor that all conquered lands must be returned as originally agreed. But facing the desperate situation, the other leaders agreed. Godfrey, Tancred, Robert all nodded. They needed to get inside before Kerbogha arrived. On the night of June 2nd to 3rd, 1098, the plan was executed. Bohemond had his men pretend to march south as a distraction. At night, they turned back in darkness, approaching the Tower of the Two Sisters where Firouz waited. Silence. Not a sound. The entire army held its breath. Firouz lowered a rope ladder. About 60 Norman knights climbed up, with Bohemond himself among the first to set foot on Antioch's walls that night. They quickly opened a side gate, and like water bursting through a dam, the Crusader army poured into the city they had besieged for 8 long months. Chaos erupted everywhere, screaming, clashing swords, people running for their lives. Crusaders and local Christians together attacked the Turkish defenders. One painful detail: in that chaos, Firouz's own brother was also killed. The traitor lost his own family because of what he had chosen to do. 8 months of siege ended in one night. One man opened a gate, and an entire city fell. But the joy would last exactly 48 hours. On the morning of June 3rd, the Crusaders controlled most of Antioch. Only the citadel on top of Mount Silpius remained in Turkish hands. Yagi Sian, who had defended Antioch for 8 months, panicked and fled the city with a small group of bodyguards, abandoning his family and soldiers. While fleeing, he fell from his horse. The injury was too severe, his guards couldn't get him back up, so they left him by the roadside and ran. An Armenian peasant found the governor dying on the road. He cut off Yagisian's head and brought it to Bohemond as a trophy of war to present. The irony was bitter. Yagisian had expelled the Armenians to prevent internal betrayal. Now an Armenian had ended his life in the most humiliating way. The head of Antioch's former ruler now lay at Bohemond's feet. But victory was incomplete while Yagisian's son still held the citadel above. Inside the city, a massacre unfolded. The Crusaders and local Christians killed not just Turkish soldiers, but also civilians, women, children, everyone. They hadn't even finished clearing the bodies when on June 4th, Kerbogha's advance forces appeared on the horizon. By the 6th, the entire army arrived. Now the Crusaders understood how Yagisian must have felt for 8 months. They were besieged inside the very city they had captured 2 days earlier. The balance of power was completely in Kerbogha's favour. 20,000 starving, exhausted troops facing 40 to 75,000 fresh soldiers. Even worse, they hadn't had time to stockpile food. Antioch had been besieged for 8 months, its granaries nearly empty. They were hungrier than before. Kerbogha attacked relentlessly. In one battle, Roger of Barneville and 15 elite knights were ambushed and killed right in front of the city gates. Peter the Hermit, who had once deserted and been dragged back, was now sent to negotiate with Kerbogha. He proposed settling things by single combat. Kerbogha refused. Despair engulfed the city. Many wanted to surrender, many wanted to attempt a desperate breakout. No one knew what to do in such a hopeless situation. And in that darkest moment, a miracle happened. Or at least, everyone believed it was a miracle, and sometimes belief is more powerful than truth itself. Peter Bartholomew was a poor peasant from Provence, a nobody whom no one had noticed until he claimed he had received a vision from St. Andrew. He said St. Andrew had appeared and shown him the location of the Holy Lance, the spear that the Roman soldier Longinus used to pierce Christ's side on the cross. If they found the Holy Lance, St. Andrew promised, the Crusaders would be victorious, a promise from heaven for men standing at the edge of annihilation. Bishop Adhemar of Les Pieux, the spiritual leader of the crusade, was skeptical of this story. But Raymond of Toulouse believed and ordered a search immediately. On June 14th, they began digging in the Cathedral of St. Peter, exactly where Peter Bartholomew had indicated. All day long, they found nothing. By evening, when everyone was about to give up, Peter Bartholomew himself jumped into the pit and suddenly produced a rusty piece of iron, claiming it was the lance. Many suspected he had hidden the iron beforehand and staged the whole thing. Even Bishop Adhemar didn't believe it. But none of that mattered anymore, because the crowd believed. People who were starving, desperate, about to die, they needed a miracle, and now they had one, whether real or fake. The Crusaders' spirits blazed back to life like flames fanned by wind. They were no longer starving wretches waiting to die, but warriors of God holding a holy relic. Real or fake didn't matter. What mattered was faith. And that faith was powerful enough to transform 20,000 desperate men into an army ready to die. On June 24th, they attempted one final negotiation. Kerbogha rejected all terms. No way out remained, only one option left: fight or die trying. 3 days of fasting and prayer followed. Men about to march into battle wrote their wills, said goodbye to comrades, prepared for the death awaiting them outside. But they didn't choose surrender. They didn't choose to starve inside the walls. They chose to march out and fight, carrying the Holy Lance as their banner. On June 28, 1098, as dawn broke over the horizon, Antioch's gates swung open, and the Crusaders marched out to face their destiny. The Crusaders formed 6 divisions, filing out through the bridge gate on the north side of the city. Raymond carried the Holy Lance at the front, though he was too sick to fight. Kerbogha watched from a distance. He decided to let all the Crusaders exit before attacking, thinking he could annihilate them all in one decisive battle. That may have been a fatal mistake. Or maybe it didn't matter, because what happened next was what truly decided the outcome of this battle. The Crusaders advanced without stopping. Gaunt, starving, but they marched forward like men who did not fear death. Perhaps they truly didn't, believing God was with them, and then the unthinkable happened. The emirs in Kerbogha's coalition began withdrawing their troops. One by one, they turned around and left the battlefield. The reason was bitterly ironic. They feared Kerbogha winning more than they feared the Crusaders. If Kerbogha won, he would become too powerful and dominate them all. Dukak of Damascus withdrew first, triggering a chain reaction. Other emirs saw this and also withdrew. The coalition collapsed mid-battle like a soap bubble. Kerbogha tried to hold his formation, but it was too late. Panic spread everywhere. Soldiers saw their commanders fleeing and fled too without thinking. The Crusaders pursued them all the way to the Iron Bridge, cutting down anyone they could catch. The army that had outnumbered them scattered like sheep before wolves. Kerbogha fled back to Mosul, losing all prestige and power. He would never recover from this humiliating defeat until his death in 1102. On June 29th, the garrison in the citadel on the mountain saw their allies defeated catastrophically. They decided to surrender to Bohemond unconditionally. Bohemond became the first prince of Antioch, achieving the dream he had pursued since leaving Italy. His own kingdom in the east had finally become reality. The Principality of Antioch would survive for nearly 200 years, until 1268, one of the longest-lasting Crusader states in the Middle East. The victory at Antioch opened the road for the Crusaders to march on Jerusalem. 1 year later, in July 1099, they finally captured the Holy City. As for Peter Bartholomew and the Holy Lance, after the victory, doubts about him only grew. Eventually, he demanded trial by fire to prove he told the truth. On April 8, 1099, he walked through 2 massive bonfires to prove the lance was real. He was severely burned and died 12 days later. So, miracle or fraud, the answer perhaps matters less than what this story teaches us about the power of faith in the face of absolute desperation. 20,000 starving, exhausted men trapped by an army 3 times their size achieved victory. Not because they were stronger, but because they believed they would win. And Kerbogha's mighty coalition collapsed not from weakness, but from distrust. They feared their own allies more than the enemy before them. Bitter irony indeed. Sometimes victory comes not from numbers or weapons, but from belief. Whether that belief is based on truth or illusion. Antioch 1098 proves exactly that.